Let's do it, man. Let's do it. And so, Mike Andler, been knowing you for or following you, watching you for about a year. I would say, like, man, you're involved in a lot of really cool stuff. I've just photography, you, just documenting your life and sharing positive experiences. Like, man, I've kept up with a lot of things that you post, and it's like I've never once come to your page and been like, oh man, that guy kind of brought me down today. You know, it's always like it's always something positive. Which, like, man, especially right now, even amid the pandemic, it's still positivity. I was like telling Colby, he was over, we were eating dinner last night, and I was like, hey man, Mike Andler's live, and like we just set it down like we're just watching it, because it's like, oh, this is not divisive in any way. This is not negative. We'll see what Steve's doing today. So it's almost like I feel like I'm watching a version of the Truman Show when I pick up my phone. It's like, if I'm going to consume content on Facebook, I would rather look at your photos of concerts and videos and share your content than some of the other that headlines that are like, share me. Those ones that you see a headline, it's like, oh, something divisive. And man, it's I want to be I want to put that content out there. I'm a historian, so I comment on a lot of social issues as well. I teach history at a college here nearby. But man, you've been a part of some incredible music history, right? Chris Floyd was telling me that you started following the Dead in '89 also. Is that true?
88.
88, wow.
88.
What?
I'm sorry. I'm technically, yes. I started following them in 89. Yes. So my first show was in early 89.
So what was that like? I mean, just getting to see that history. I mean, that's something, me coming into the scene that I've been in since 2015. And when I hear about people seeing the Dead, I'm like immediately mind blown by that. I know that kind of maybe sounds like infant in my musical taste, but it's just something that I didn't get into until I was an adult. I'm 33 years old now. And, but now, like when I go to somebody that's go to a Panic show and they're like, yeah, I saw Jerry play live. I'm like, oh, it just, what was that like to witness the Dead at that time?
So, before I answer that, I want to thank you for what you just said about the content that I put out. Was quite honestly one of the most validating things that I have heard that is related to my content, for lack of a better word. We'll call it my content, or my presence, or my really intention as it relates to Facebook. And it's worth mentioning that at this point, I'm almost exclusively a Facebook user. Or a Facebook content creator, if you will. I do have a Tiny Hat Experiences YouTube channel. I don't do a whole lot on it at the moment. But the reason that I'm pointing this out about Facebook is because it was a very specific decision that I made. And it was a decision that was in part, and I would say a big part, a result of the fact that I was an organizational VP at MySpace for quite a number of years. And this is not something that really many people such as you have any idea about, but I was a senior VP of tech for MySpace for the last 6.5 years of its existence. And while I was there, I witnessed Facebook come into existence, and then Facebook essentially overtake what we had built at MySpace. And during that time, I was exposed to an enormous amount of social media phenomenon shit. And I was a part of multiple subpoenas where there were, child predator cases going on. There were multiple murder cases that occurred during the span of the existence of MySpace. And there was an enormous number of technology systems in place that were developed and run by teams that I managed, and their sole purpose was content review and image review, and basically identification and removal of bad content. And I watched as this trend evolved, and I watched with where the social network bullying started way back. Before there was Facebook, we were dealing with MySpace bullying cases. And I think that over the years, what happened is I started really getting a very clear understanding of just how destructive content could be on these networks. And I just one day, I remember roughly when this happened. It was somewhere around it was right around 3 years ago was when it really kicked in. I just made a decision, you know what? There's no point in me propagating things that are negative, me being the source of things that are negative, me responding to other people's content with negativity. Like it ceased to make sense to me as adding any type of value whatsoever to humanity. And so initially it was a very, very deliberate decision, like a rule that I set for myself, and it even extended, and still to a pretty large degree extends into sarcastic, just comedy, which I'm a huge fan of. A lot of people don't know this because they think that, they may think what you said, which is true, but they also may have this notion that everything's really serious with me. There's always been this idea, Mike is really serious or Mike is too serious. Mike is actually really passionate, and when a topic is serious, I'm pretty passionate about it in probably a serious way. I take my photography, I take videography seriously, I take relationships seriously. But if we start getting into topics like sarcasm and just pure comedy, it's a fucking joker fest. And so my decisions of what I want to represent and embody as it relates to the propagation of things that have to do with my life, they always have to go through this test of, is there a value to this? Am I just posting, the cry for help posts that you have to solve a little riddle about the person and ask them a lot of questions and just give them a lot of attention because they want to kind of play with you to get attention about whatever their problem is. And a lot of the times it's not really a problem. It's just someone wanting to bitch about an aspect of life that, we all have to deal with. So it's really intentional for me, and it's become something that is very important to me because as you've seen, it's not all about, Mike going for an ice cream sundae and, Mike going to concerts. It's also when Mike is in a deep depression and when Mike is dealing with the most obscure and heartbreaking dynamic between myself and Steve, that anyone, people read these things about Steve the dog and they're like, what? I can't even imagine this. Like Mike and Steve having a problem makes no sense to people because they've seen so much of this day-to-day positive, great experience with him. But for me, it's critical that it's not just those happy days. It has to be a true representation of all the things that are going on. And so, you know, I think that at the end of the day, it's really valuable to express yourself and express the good and the bad, but to do it in a way where it's it rises above just being negativity for the sake of negativity. You know, that doesn't help anyone. It's not inspirational. It sometimes it's even awkward. You read these things and you're like, fuck, like, I mean, clearly there's something very negative being expressed, and that's okay. We have our moments where we're not in a good place, but to express it in a way where it's hard for someone to know where to go with it, except to just jump on top of it and say, oh yeah, that's fucking awful. Like, yeah, that sucks. You should go burn that person's house down, you know, steal their car. Like, some of the stuff that we see is completely ridiculous. And I was exposed to these things very early on with social media, with MySpace. So that's kind of the long story, but it's really appreciated because, of course, the intention is to inspire people, or to, you know, for someone, even if it's just one person, even if it's just you, Brian Wilson, you're like, yeah, man, I like watching this fucking lunatic walking his dog because it makes me happy. It's better than someone bitching about the politics. Even if it's just one person, that's, you know, the job is done. The objective has been met. And I was having a conversation, and I'll answer your question about the Grateful Dead in just a second,
going,
but
man.
this is a really, really important topic. And it came up with me during the past week. Actually, I was having a conversation with someone about the topic of social media and content creation. And I've gotten, you know, I've stepped pretty deep into some fairly unique live streaming techniques and types of content, and I'm doing some very experimental things. And for the most part, it's all because it's really, really interesting to me. It's interesting to me to see whether just looking out over the balcony and doing a live stream of traffic set to music is something that is worth watching. And it's interesting to me if it's something that's worth filming. But on the other side of that, I think it's human nature to want people to actually like it. Like, you're doing it for yourself. If you're smart, you're doing it for yourself, because then at least you know that you're going to succeed regardless, but you hope that people are going to like it. But they're not always going to like it. And if you're going to expect that they're always going to like it, then essentially you're setting yourself up with basically a fear of failure or an unwillingness to fail. And then that's just going to paralyze you, and you're not going to ever experiment or innovate outside of your comfort zone. So at any rate, I was having a conversation with someone just this past week, and I was talking about this because it's something that I'm willing and able and interested in expressing the fact that, yes, I actually do give a shit if people like the content. Like, yep, I'm raising my hand. I am going to admit that Facebook is about other people giving attention to whatever you're doing. And so the balance of that, though, is that, and this is what the comment that this person made to me, they said, look, if someone opened up Facebook and they saw you, person you don't even know, they saw your live stream and it was you, and you were walking Steve the dog, because I was using that example. I said, you know, I'm sure that you'll see me later with a ridiculous stream of Steve the dog. And I'm like, I think it's really a unique perspective. It's just a little dog walking around, and he's not on a leash, and most of the time I'm not saying anything, and it's just not something you see very often. So I think it's cool. And this person, he said to me, you know, you never know who might be watching that. Someone could be in a really bad spot. They could see you with Steve the dog, and it could inspire them to go adopt a dog that day. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I never thought of that as being an outcome, but it's exactly right. And so if you think of the content as something that you're doing first and foremost for your own self-care and inspiration and life journey, but if you just reach one other person with it, if one other person watches this podcast and they're like, hey, you know, these guys they're talking about music and podcasts and this and that and the other, and they're inspired, well, then our job is done. So the topic of social media to me is really, really a deep and significant one. And I think a lot of it is because, as very few people know, I was running a social media development team for quite a long time. And, you know, back in the day when you had 120 million users, as we did, that was a fuck ton. Then Facebook came around. It's not a fuck ton anymore, but, you know, be that as it may. So way before MySpace and Facebook, though, were the days of the Grateful Dead. And
nice segue there, man.
I thought it was good. I thought it was pretty good. It's a very interesting question. And it's an interesting question. I think it'll be especially interesting for you, maybe so for other people that are hardcore into Panic. I was introduced to the Grateful Dead within months of when I was introduced to Widespread Panic. And what happened was, I think that I kind of latched on to the, I knew that the Grateful Dead was a big thing. I knew that there was something like, there was a history, there was this big entity that was way too big for me to really know what it was all about. But I did know that it was all about something, and I gravitated to it pretty hardcore. And because of that, I was pretty solo focused on going to see Grateful Dead shows for quite a long time. Now, fast forward 30 years or so, kind of the same thing has happened with Panic. And I just got immersed into it. And it had been a gradual roll for years and years and years through many different cities. But I came to a place where really the same thing happened. And I just fell deep into that culture and into the people, into, you know, everything that we have with Widespread Panic. Back in 1989, there was a huge, huge difference in falling into the Grateful Dead in that way versus, you know, 8 or 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago, falling into Widespread Panic that way. And the difference is that the first Grateful Dead show I went to, I think there were, I'll have to look up the capacity. It was in a Coliseum. There was, you know, 10 to 25,000 people. But the second Grateful Dead concert I went to, there were 80,000 people. That was at RFK Stadium. And there were another probably 30,000 all around the parking lots camping for the 2 days. So what it was like to answer your question is, it was very similar to Widespread Panic, the Widespread Panic experience, as I like to call it. The people, the music, the culture, the kindness, the drugs, the alcohol, the travel, obviously the music, the connection with the band members, just like all of that, that was there. But it was there within the context of an enormous microcosm's not the right word, an enormous organism of people that was, and within a year, I had been to shows where there were 95,000 people. I remember that 110,000 was a number from Foxborough, Massachusetts, which was in a show in 1990. So the scale of the culture was so much larger that at least my immersion into it and my immersion at that time was very, very different than a equal immersion, if you will, into widespread panic. And I think that to me is something that is truly unique to Panic. And there's other bands that are coming around. I'm sure that you want to chat about all different music here and there. So I can tell you that a band that I've somewhat recently become familiar with, and that I think will experience a very similar thing, is Goose. And the idea that Panic can have this extremely tight, small show vibe where literally we all know each other. I mean, you and I have never spoken until 20 minutes ago, ever. And within 30 seconds of our conversation, you mentioned your best friend as someone who I'm very close friends with as well. So that level of, 1 degree of separation is something that we have, or to a large degree, many people have in the Panic community. And without that, the Grateful Dead experience was a very different one. Doesn't mean it was better or worse, but for someone like you who has entered into the mix when you did with Panic, to do that would not have looked like my experience. It would have looked like someone's experience from 20 years before my experience. And what would be really cool is to continue this conversation on another show with someone who did have that experience, to see, because the interconnectivities of how the cultures have developed and how Panic will continue to evolve, if they do in this type of way. It's very interesting. And, I have no clue how that's going to be. And it's hard for me to even fathom what it would have been like to go to a Grateful Dead show at the size venue that I saw my first Panic show, which was Ziggy's in North Carolina. And it was literally in LA. It's very expensive to have a lot of square footage. I don't have a lot of square footage, and Ziggy's was fucking smaller than my condo. So that was not the experience that I had with the Grateful Dead at all. It's hard for me to even compare the two, even though there are so many similarities. So how's that?
That's good. That's good.
Right.
And so like when I first met Z-Man, he was asking me questions about Panic, and this came up again. I mentioned when I was on the phone the other day, he's like, blew his mind that I didn't hear about widespread panic till 2015. And Colby was like, hey man, you want to go to this widespread panic show with me? The 2 Arkansas shows are the first 2 times I saw him, then Memphis in May.
What were the dates of Arkansas? I didn't go to those shows.
It was 2015 and 2016.
Okay.
I can't remember the dates. I've got the posters from the
Of course
show.
it is.
Yeah, that's my studio. I haven't hung it all up yet, but I've got so much. I mean, I haven't even been collecting that long, and I'm
Right.
out of space on my walls already.
Yeah.
But man, that is something also unique that I love about Panic is their artwork is just,
It's
and
amazing.
Jeff Wood's artwork is out of this world, man. It's like a nice little side note within the community. There's so many things to consume, and they're a part of the community too. So why would I
Yeah.
not want to consume their stuff?
Yeah.
But it is interesting. Like, so I know that like when Panic in the Streets happened, that's like an 80,000 person crowd.
Right.
Did you, was that just like their largest show? Or did you see them have some similar shows? Like, is Mikey passing away? Like, why? And then maybe losing a little momentum, perhaps? Why I didn't hear about him? I don't know.
Um, I I'm not going to represent that opinion at all. Not because it may be right. I've never thought about it, and I'm not. I don't even think I want to start thinking about it now because interestingly, just quickly coming back to the social media topic, and I'm very, very, very quiet about statements like this one that I'm going to make, but I feel really strongly about it. And in fact, I've never made a statement on this topic. I've never publicly made a statement on this topic, but I think that this, this trend, this tendency, and I'm not by any means suggesting that your question is a case of this at all, but the discussion and the way that it evolves on Panic Streams really is probably the best example about this sort of Mikey versus George
Yeah, the
versus Jimmy
comparisons.
discussion. It's one that, to anyone who watches this, that discussion, in my opinion, it's a disservice to everyone. It's not just a disservice to the person who is on the losing end of the comparison. It's even a disservice, I think, to the person on quote winning end of the comparison. If it's Jimmy and Mikey, it's not
Even George.
helpful. And
Even
George, I mean George too.
Even Sam Holt. I love listening to the
exactly.
Sam Holt shows.
And so what I'm not saying is that I'm not suggesting people shouldn't have their opinion and even express their opinion. But I wish that the expressing of the opinions on this topic, and same thing, Todd and Dwayne, the same thing, the same exact
P. Lavitz and
concept goes
JoJo.
up. We should honor all of these band members in precisely the same way. And, if you got your favorite, have your favorite. I mean, most people have their favorite band member that's currently in the band, but you don't hear them saying, yeah, JB's better than Dave. Like it makes no sense. So it doesn't make any more sense, I don't think, when it's with previous band members. So that's kind of a passionate way of me saying that I didn't ever get to a place where I was like, hardcore in favor of one member versus another member. But what I will say is that over the past 6 years or 7 years, for a large portion of the total number of shows that I've seen, it's been the existing lineup. And I'm every show that I go to, I leave the venue astonished at how amazing these musicians are. So I think that the answer to the question you asked about why number one, I didn't go to Panic in the Streets, and I don't believe that there has been a larger show, but I'm reasonably certain that there hasn't been a larger show. I don't know what the next largest has been. But, I don't think I went to a show that was under 20-ish for the Grateful Dead. not that I could name, and most of them were considerably larger than that. And I mean, if I had to just throw out my opinion on it, I think that it's because Panic has very intentionally created and evolved themselves in a way that is about having a close community and about this tightness, and you can't have that when it's a huge show. So, if I go through from the early days when I saw Panic the first time to when I went out to school in Colorado, I saw them quite a number of times there. I saw when they first played Red Rocks and opened for Blues Traveler. I saw that show.
Wow.
And then in Boston, I saw quite a number of shows that were at, small to medium sized venues. And I just think that this is what they've wanted. I think they've wanted to be a band that is just like the band that they are. And that means that for us fans, we have to deal with things like it being a giant nightmare to get tickets. And it's unfortunate. That's an area that I really would like to see some evolving, whether it's the band going to purely mail order, or whether it's a more appropriate way of representing those of us who, this is a huge portion of our life. And so having it so that at least it can be a smooth process for us to all be a part of it and continue being a part of it, I think that would be great. But, I think the band is doing all that they can to continue performing at an elite, the highest of the highest level, with the best of the best overall production, while still keeping it, for the most part, a thing that miraculously people we talk to, the question that I get most often is, what is widespread panic? They don't even gather that it's music or a concert I'm going to. So
a lot of people think I'm going to see Panic at the Disco.
And that Panic at the Disco, I had a best friend within the past year, best friend from out here in LA, a somewhat newer best friend, but someone I'm very close to. He moved, and a month after he moves, he's like, sends me a text. He's like, dude, I finally know what you've been talking about with Panic. And he sends me a link to a Panic in the Disco video. And I'm like, no, you don't. So I think it's all by design. I think it's all by design.
I've seen that. They've got to be keeping it that way to an extent. I've been really loving Sam Holt's live streams he's been doing. And he told a story before, which he doesn't talk a ton when I'm listening to him, at least. I haven't listened to whole ones all the way through. He'll be playing while I'm eating dinner or something, and I'll turn it on. But he told a song about Don't Tell the Band, the song. Did you hear that story?
I did not.
Well, he was kind of saying that at that time, I think that album might have come out in 99, but I could be wrong on that. I know it was late 90s, early 2000s, but he said the band had got to a point where if anything happened that was off key or something within not the performance side, but it'd be hey, don't tell the band. That the band was getting to this level that that was something that was a very big narrative on that album. They named the album that. And they said that the artist who did that artwork, I can't remember who it wasn't somebody I'd heard of, wanted to do Thought Sausage for the artwork and for the name of the album. And they were like, no, it's going to be named Don't Tell the Band for this reason. And I thought that was very interesting. But man, I remember I was watching them perform at Vegas with Cora, my wife, and Colby.
And you were sharing.
this would have been 18. You were sharing videos from it the other day.
Okay.
I believe, with the go-go dancers,
Yeah.
right? And I just like, I felt that you said the same thing about the Dead, man. I'm sitting there and I just had this overwhelming sense of attachment or just connection to this history. I was like, these guys, like I just realized it while I was there. I was like, they have such an amazing history. Like Dave Schools at 420 Fest last year. Or no, it was Jason Isbell saying that Dave Schools bought the Truckers their first van to tour in. Like stuff like that. I hear how they've like helped artists and stuff over the years, and it just like is some of the most inspiring stories. And as a historian, like honestly, if I was gonna, I don't have a PhD, and the girl I went to grad school with has been in PhD school for 6.5 years. And I may never get one, but it's like, if I was going to write, I know a guy that wrote his dissertation on the Truckers. He went to ASU, got a doctorate in philosophy, wrote his on the cultural impact of the drive-by truckers. But I just had this realization. I'm like, man, this is a doctoral dissertation, this band, you know, and yet, so as a historian, yet I see like everybody I talk to, like you and your friend, like the Panic at the Disco thing, or who's Widespread Panic. People make funny videos that are like, you know, Panic should write some hits.
Right.
Yet they're the only entity that's ever played a song that made me cry. Right? I've never cried at I mean, I guess I like teared up, but man, I cry listening to Panic all the time. But at a live show, is listening to Panic the only time I've ever cried. I kind of was telling you about that. I'm getting kind of like worked up thinking about it, you know.
You want to take a minute, get a Kleenex?
No, I'm good.
Before you go, just because I don't want to forget to ask this. So I think it was during that run, that 2018 run, I think, that they played "Don't Tell the Band." Wasn't it one of the songs played?
Yes.
So this is just a side note, but this has happened with many songs. I'm sure, perhaps I saw that song played at some show that I went to 25 years ago, but I don't even know all the shows that I went to 25 years ago. Point being, and that night was an example of this. I knew of the song. I had heard probably little clips here and there, but I did not consciously recall having heard it played. And 2 notes into it, first of all, I knew that that's what it was, but I like instantaneously, it was my fucking favorite song. So that's something that's happened for me quite a number of times because of the way that I, you know, from day one to today, how that has happened over the course of such, you know, this 30-year period. And I was all different places in life. I was physically living in different places. I was going through different things. I was, you know, half of those shows way back in the early days, who knows how wasted I could have been. And so it's like, that's part of the experience for me also, is like every show I rediscover a new thing, even having been to a hell of a lot, especially in you know, in the past few years, a whole lot of shows. There's nothing I'm chasing. There's just things that I happen to be there when they play, and I'm like, holy fuck, like how did I get so lucky for that? So anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt on that, but
no. This is man, this has turned out to be a fantastic conversation. Thanks again for taking the time. But man, like I've listened to, like I said this after I like broke down and started crying at that show to Colby, because Colby looked over at me and like Jimmy's playing, just like smiling at JB, and just everybody is in this harmonious synchronization, and they're like the look on Jimmy's face of just like the sheer happiness, and like him just like nodding at JB. And Colby said something to me like, he doesn't even know what he's doing to us right now. Because he just like saw me cued in onto Jimmy, and I was like, he really doesn't. He doesn't know how he's making me feel. And maybe he has a concept, right? But like at that thought, that's what like tipped me over the edge. I was just like, I've been listening, and I in my head at that moment, I was like, I've been listening to music my whole life, and this is the only band ever make me feel this way. Right? Like
Oh,
that's truly special. That's I and people. There was a period of time where I wasn't listening to any other bands until the new Tool album came out. I feel like you might have been on a
you're so, oh, it's okay. What I want to
sidebar.
respond. I want to respond, but I'm fucking thrilled that you just made that comment. So the sidebar is it's a not just a sidebar here. So this topic of you crying and then tying it into, Jimmy doesn't know how he's making you feel. So number one, I'm not sure. I don't recall whether I have cried or teared up at another concert. I potentially have, and I'll think of one at some point, I'm sure. But what I can tell you that I did at Panic is one of the occasions was, um, I think it was actually, I know it was the week, it wasn't even a week before uh, those Halloween shows, because that year, Milwaukee was like, it was like, well, it was the previous weekend. So I left Milwaukee, came back here to LA, and then Thursday I drove to Vegas. But that Milwaukee show, I was on the rail, and I was I was pretty much right in the center. I was slightly Jimmy's side, like one person, maybe two people. And Milwaukee is it's a small stage. It's like the band is like it's like the opposite stage to the Park Theater, and uh, they played Protein Drink Sewing Machine as it was either, I think it was the last, I think it was the encore, if I'm not mistaken. And um, don't recall whether it was Saturday or Sunday night, but I want to say it was Sunday night. And that's another one of those songs where I didn't hear it until, after they had played it quite a number of times. But the first time I heard it, which first time I realized it, was in Playa, my first year, Playa 3. And I couldn't get enough of it. Like, I walked out of the show and then I was just singing and humming Protein Sewing Machine like for weeks and weeks after. So when they started it in Milwaukee, I was completely overcome with emotion to the point where I filmed the whole show, and I posted it recently. I'll repost it and tag you just to kind of this little in honor of this little chat we're having. But for the entire time, the whole song, I was hysterically crying. And so, to your point that they don't know what they're doing to us, they do know what they're doing to us. Because in this particular case, I was openly weeping, pouring tears
I mean,
while
they probably see
filming.
that.
While filming, yeah, it was the first time I had done it, and on the rail, and I was like, "Fuck it!" Like you know, these guys know what I'm all about anyway. They've seen me enough times. Like now they're going to get to see what happens when I have a fucking emotional breakdown 3 feet in front of them. And so, and the video, I consciously was aware, okay, if you're going to do both of these things at once, then you're going to fucking make the video good nonetheless, which it came out really, really good. So
Yeah, man, I didn't have like a whole lot of like real, I just wanted to talk with you about Panic, and I knew we would have some really great stories of shows, and I would get to hear some great stories of I love, part of what I love meeting these new people within the community is their stories, man. Like this stuff is so interesting to me. I feel like, I compare it to this. I was homeschooled until 8th grade. And then when I went to public school, everybody that had been like became my friend, but they had like this other past together, right? Like they had gone to elementary school together, they were in Boy Scouts together, and I'm like, hey, tell me about the Panic Boy Scouts, guys. Like,
Right.
what was it like? You know, but it has been such an awesome community to, you know, plug into, to be a part of, right? You know, I was listening to, you ever read or listened to Meditations?
All the time. I,
Okay, well, that's another topic. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the
I've
Stoic
listened
philosopher.
to, so I have not listened to, I'm reasonably familiar with Marcus Aurelius, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that everything that I've read or heard him saying or attributed to him is mind-blowingly compelling. But I'm not, I don't have any like expertise. So let's hear it, because
That, well,
I
he
this
said,
is
and
an he's
I just heard this today actually, but he was talking about the difference in saying that you're a member of humanity and a part of it,
yeah,
right? Like that there's so like and I wasn't thinking that when I said necessarily, but like it is like the panic community, you said with the dead, it's like an organism. That's
yeah.
another great way to describe it. Like, and that was the broader point he was making. He was talking about atoms and vapor, and I mean it was a very compelling listen. I'm going to try and finish it today, but I thought that was profound. Like it's, you know, yes, you're a part of it. You're not a member of it. You don't pay into, yeah. The things I hear when I say like, oh, I'm a member of the country club or something, you know,
Right.
there's no, I don't feel any sense of loyalty to the country club or anything like that. I don't know. I mean, that's maybe not the best metaphor, but like, you know, like all those people you mentioned earlier, it's like, man, and not to just like keep like, you know, stroking your whatever, but like
Careful.
these people that I plugged into, it's like you're one of them, you know. Like I'm like, okay, well, there's Curtis George, there's Mike, there's Z Man, there, you know, there's a collection of people within this community that I have found to be like special, right? That I want to have a conversation. I want to contribute the conversation into my podcast data bank, and so happens we share a lot of the same interests. So it's been no short point of cool topics, but that's just a cool little concept I picked up just today. Like I was just listening to it. So
Yeah, and I think that to that point, and thank you, it's very nice. It's really humbling, and I'm not sure how to respond truthfully, but um, again, I think that being a part of the community takes no more effort than a willingness to be open and to participate in it. And so, you know, for me, it's had this other little side element to it, which is this idiotic decision of wearing a tiny hat to a show 6 or however many years ago. And that has put me in many, many, many more spontaneous conversations than I ever in 10 lifetimes would have ever become a part of. And so it it was almost by default that I got to communicate with and become close with people like Colby, and for that matter, people like you. But at the end of the day, it wasn't by doing anything other than just fucking, talking to people, just like literally just, in the bathroom line. I mean, when I go to a show in the bathroom line, when I come out of the bathroom line, I've got 10 new friends. So, it's sort of the same general philosophy that we were talking about with social media. It's like, just like try to add to this, try to add something that's going to be a net positive to whatever all the people and whatever this experience is. Try to make it somehow a better thing. And truthfully, I mean, that carries over for me into anything that I do. if I am, if I walk past someone on the street and Steve wants to play with their dog, and, they ask me, can they play? I just got this dog a week ago and she's never played with any other dogs. I'm like, fuck yeah, sure. Like, and I'll stay there for 10 minutes and let them play, because that's adding something valuable it's a positive. So it's at a show, there's an endless opportunity to connect with other people. You can do it with the usher, you can do it with the security, when you're going through the metal detector and people are bitching and moaning about how long it's taking, or this or that or the other, you can, strike up a conversation with them. And, it's very easy to have an impact on someone that's more positive than negative. And, it's fucked up, but I'll just come right out and say it. I have multiple security people's contact information on my phone who I text with, who were just employees of venues that I just became buddies with during the course of the weekend. There's a guy a guy named Gary in the Maryland, in Oxon Hills, Maryland, at the MGM. And the first year that they played there, I think in 2018, or it's either 18 or 17. And then they played the following year again. He and I just became pals during the course of, standing in lines and just chatting and in front of the venue. And I showed up the following year, and the dude found me pretty much instantly when I walked into the venue. And I got a text from him not so many months ago. And he's like, hey man, I guess we're not going to be seeing you guys this year, but hopefully we'll see you again soon. I bought him a poster at the end of the weekend. He saw everyone standing in the line for posters, and he was directing the poster line. And so at the end of the weekend, I walked up and surprised him. I was like, here you go, man.
Wow.
So
that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was Colby's birthday show that you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
Those were great shows, but it's just like, there's that type of community. I think it's a result of the size. I think it's a result of the number of people, and the closeness is just easier and more accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's just sidebar on this. I keep looking at your bicep muscles.
Well, hang on. No, I'm going to cut you off there because we didn't go back to a very important topic. I think that what you said is roughly an exact quote. You said, here, let me do this. You said there was a period where I didn't listen to anything other than Panic until the new Tool album came out. So we're gonna go back to that.
Okay, let's do that.
So the new Tool album came out on August 30th of 2019. So we're actually coming up on a year. It's really good that you mentioned this. And I'll bring up again for anyone watching, Brian and I have never spoken prior to, we talked for probably 3 minutes before maybe where this podcast started, where he started recording it. But I was walking Steve the dog just yesterday, and I was walking him today too, but this happened yesterday when I was walking him. And I thought to myself, I wonder what we're going to talk about on this podcast. Like, I have this outline that this guy gave me, and, I've watched some of his other stuff here and there, and I have some familiarity, but primarily his podcast, there's a heavy emphasis on jiu-jitsu, which we should talk about after this. And probably the bicep comment can just fold into
just
that.
your health and wellness. I know you're a healthy guy, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, man. Well, I got nothing but time. So, um, the, so I had gotten an advanced copy of the Tool album. It was not, it didn't have every track. It was lacking I think there's three like super experimental instrumental, like I'm not going to call them fillers, but they're fillers,
Intermissions.
they're intermissions sort of. I think they're fucking badass, but like I never fast forward through them ever. Even when I'm like, I just want to hear a little bit of Tool. If that's where it is, then that's what's going on, and I'm gonna like get what I need out of it. But I got it. I think the 28th or 27th, and on just a download, and I remember I was sitting just across the room from where I am right now when I got this. And I remember vividly, I put on my pair of headphones and I was kicking back, and we can tie this into the health and wellness if we so choose. But I do know that I had eaten an edible microdose of cannabis probably an hour or so before I started. And I had also I just worked out somewhere pretty close to when I did this. So I was in a super relaxed frame of mind, and I was like, I was ready for a new Tool album, and been a hardcore Tool fan since '89, since the very early days. My brother, one day he came home, he's like, hey man, here, you should check this band out. And I did. And I've now been obsessed with Tool for 30 years. And he's nowhere near as, he's a non-Tool fan compared to what I've turned into. But nevertheless, thank you, David, for turning me on to Tool. If you've read my Tool posts, you've probably seen me mention him because I usually do. But I sat down in the chair and I put on a pair of headphones and I started that album. And I remember as clear as can be that I got about maybe 1 minute, if that, into Pneuma. So I had listened to the first song, Fear Inoculum. I think Fear Inoculum is the first song. I listened to it, finished it, and was just blown away. It was already at the point where this happens to me through life. This has happened by far the most with Tool, Jethro Tull, and Rush. Not as much with Panic, and really not as much. I may think of another example, but those three come to mind quickly. What maybe Yes is another one where I start listening to it for the first time, and usually this goes on for forever after the first time. Certain songs, and in a lot of cases, a lot of songs, I can't get through the song because I like it so much that I rewind it, start it back to the beginning. And I can tell you that I didn't do that with Fear Inoculum, but I almost think either I did it with Pneuma or I was so fucking close to hitting the start over because I was so blown away by how my body, I had chills for the entire time that I was listening to the first album. The whole time I was sitting in the chair, and pretty early on into it, I realized, wait a minute, this is the first time in 13 years that I've heard new songs by a band that I'm obsessed with. Like, fucking no wonder this is happening. But I had never thought about the how deep the significance of hearing a new Tool album had been for every one of the albums prior, until I was having that experience with Fear Inoculum. And what's really funny about this is during that walk yesterday, see how I wrapped that right back around to the walk with Steve? I found myself thinking, okay, it's been about a year. So it's July 17th. So it's 11 months. So we'll call it 330 days. And I've fucking listened to that album near daily, if not multiple times daily. And there are dozens of days, dozens and 20, 30, 40 days at least that I have listened to it multiple times, usually start to finish. Just about every single workout that I have done since it came out, I have listened to it. For whatever it's worth, I have not yet listened to it today, but there have been days, not so many, where I didn't listen to it a whole time through, and a handful of days, probably, I'm sure there's 20, 30 days that I didn't listen to it at all. But that album, when it came out, right away, immediately, I believe it the day it came out, but it could have been on the pre-release. It may have been before it came out. I wrote a Facebook post and I said, this is arguably the best collection of songs that I've ever heard. In my opinion, beginning to end, this unit of music, to me, can go head to head with any album by any band that I've ever heard. And I knew that after listening to it once. Well, I don't remember the exact date. Actually, I went on to say that Pneuma, I made a very specific comment about how significant the song Pneuma was. Well, the album went on to be the album of the year, and Pneuma, I believe, I don't know the stat around it, but Pneuma, I believe, has become their most popular song, or most well-received song that they've ever written. So the answer to your question, or the response to you saying that there was a period that you were only listening to Panic, you and I were in that same thing, and probably were in it for quite a long time together. But the Tool album has permeated my fucking soul, and I'm sitting here with chills right now just thinking about this next statement. They wrote an album that, in my opinion, may as well be like the fucking theme of the COVID-19. The entire, that album embodies humanity right now. And it came out 3 months before, 3-4 months before all this happened. So I'm back to your comment about writing a PhD dissertation. I'd like to fucking write one on Fear Inoculum. And we could sit here and talk for 5 hours about, we could just have a discussion purely about my and perhaps other people's thoughts on the connection between Pneuma and Schism, which was on one of their previous albums. So I came to this point on the walk yesterday where I was like, well, fuck, I mean, worst case, if things are not going well on this discussion with Brian, I'm going to just start talking about Tool, and I'm going to use that as my escape.
Man, I've done multiple podcasts about Tool and Maynard does jujitsu, and is a purple belt under a guy I've been fortunate enough to train with 2 times, Hickson Gracie. But I have a friend, Jack Toffer. He lives in LA, and he was just working out with Hickson Gracie yesterday at his house. And that's the guy who ranks Maynard. Jack's profile picture, he's training with Maynard. Jack comes out to Arkansas usually twice a year to teach a seminar at my martial arts academy. So it's a cool connection. When Colby and I went to see A Perfect Circle, Jack was trying to get me to do a private lesson for Maynard, because I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt.
Right.
But it didn't work out. But man, Jack has trained with the guy a few times, and like us having our reverence for him, I was like, what would it be like to teach that guy jujitsu? Like, I mean, I would just treat him like I've never talked to you, and you know, I'm sure I'm like geeked out on you a couple of times, but man, Maynard would be a little different to hold my composure with. Like, oh my,
Oh
like
yeah, I mean,
just to treat him normal would be like a little more challenging to not just.
well, I think so. This is good. Uh, I mean, I'm having a fucking blast, by the way. I'm, I want to state this on the record, for the record, to the people that are watching, um, that again, you know, I didn't really know what to expect of what we were going to be doing here. Clearly, I knew we were going to talk about a podcast, and we were going to do a podcast. We were going to talk about music. Panic was going to be in. Like, yes, I understand conceptually what a fucking interview is, but I have been doing podcasts such as this from the other side of the table for a while, and this is the only way that I like to do it. Free for all, you know, it goes where it goes. It's as long as it needs to be, and it is what it is. And if people like it, fuck yeah. And if they don't, then the address bar is right there at the top, and you can just type in, you know, whatever, gofuckyourself.com or wherever you want to go for what you need. That was kind of harsh, but it worked out. But now what's happening is just it's music to my consciousness, because I think that where we're going here is maybe into the first of multiple, maybe tool specific discussions. And I'm going to say that, so I totally agree with you on Maynard. Like, it would seem that there would need to be a tremendous amount of preparation to be able to pull that off for either of us. The reality is that's a bullshit way of either of us thinking about it. And I'm going to pre-call us both out on that. It's that goes against what I know I'm about. And I know that now, just from this hour, I know what you're about. And you're about the connection. You're about the making the connection and letting it unfold in an authentic way that is whatever it's supposed to be. So as hard as it would be to do that with Maynard, I will tell you that I've had the opportunity to do that very thing with Danny Carey, he's kind of my guy. My brother's a drummer, has been a drummer for my whole life. He introduced me to Tool, and Danny obviously is beyond description as far as it goes with percussion. So there was a natural, pretty tight fit there for me. But coming out here to LA, I have had exposure to a couple venues where Danny plays with jazz musicians, and a couple specific jazz musicians. Doug Webb is one of them. He plays with a band called the Doug Webb. I think it's just called the Doug Webb Group. And they play at a venue called the Baked Potato, which, just as a side note, weirdly enough, there is a live stream tonight. No, I'm wrong. I think it was last night, and I had a conflict, so I wasn't able to stream it. But Danny plays at venues that are like the Baked Potato holds 68 people, and so I've had an opportunity to see him play at the Baked Potato 3 or 4 times. I could have, for the past 15 years, probably 150 times, but I finally made my way over there, got to meet Danny and see him play from, I'll put it this way, his drum kit was roughly the distance that my monitor is from me right now. So after and during those shows, I actually had an opportunity, and I can tell you that when I had the opportunity to speak to him, two particular occasions. One was, um, I would say it was, if the album came out in August of 2019, it was winter of 2018. And there's all the controversy about how long it took, and all the social media bitching and moaning. Why is the new album not out yet? All it just, I'm sure you saw plenty of the nonsense. Well, just like on Facebook, I thought, you know what? Number one, all of that those comments are bullshit, and it's not helping anyone. It's certainly not helping the band be more motivated to do anything. So at the set break, I went out to there's a little smoking area behind the baked potato, and Danny was sitting down, just kicking back with, randoms, just like whoever walked back there, me being the person who was walking back there at this point. And that, they were all talking to him, and I was kind of listening what people were saying, just kind of, trying to gauge, like, what are people supposed to say when they're beginning a conversation with Danny Carey in this situation, and trying to figure out what the fuck I was going to say. But I had something that I knew that I wanted to say, which was to basically just tell them, hey, look, I've been listening to you guys forever, and you're amazing. I'm sure I mentioned something about my connection to the drums. And I said, like, I just want you to know that whenever the album comes out, obviously I'm looking forward to it. I hope it comes out sooner rather than later. But whenever it comes out, I can tell you that it's going to be unbelievable. And it'll be worth it. Whenever, if it's a year from now, if it's 5 years from now, it'll be worth it. And, so I just want you to know that people like me really appreciate the process and everything else. And so he goes, well, I just hope it's good and that you guys like it. And I'm like, look, dude, it's going to be good. I understand why you'd be saying that, but I have no doubt that it's going to be way more than good. Well, then the album came out, and then I had the opportunity to go and see him with the jazz band a couple months later. And I walked up to him, and I'm like, I said, I don't even know how to express to you how good the new album is. It's so beyond anything that I could have imagined. And when we spoke here the last time, I remember the comment you made, and I just want to assure you, does that sound like a space shuttle just drove by? Was that loud? Was that insanely loud?
That was kind of loud. Aren't you on like the 30th floor?
I'm on the 14th, but that was
okay.
That was a kind of on the louder side of a daytime car driving by. But that happens pretty often. So anyway, so I'm like, this you saying you hope it's good. Well, trust me, it's more than good. And then I was actually able to basically say the same thing about the tour, because I had just seen them play here in LA, and I was like, I mean, because I had asked him the first time around, when do you think that you guys are going to tour? He said, well, the album should be out probably in the fall. We're very close to done, and I would imagine that we'll do a tour and come to LA, pretty much right away. And I said, are you sure you're going to come to LA, or are you going to come to some, town that's conveniently 2 hours away, since allegedly Maynard fucking hates LA? And he's like, no, we'll come to LA. So after that show, I was like, I mean, it's just the contrast of seeing him. So one of the other venues is a place called it's called Casablanca, I think. And I happened to see that he was playing there. This was 2 years ago, I believe, about 2.5 years ago. And I had never been there. So Stacy and I, my girlfriend, we go, I'm like, can we just leave kind of early? And she's like, well, what does that mean? She said, when does it start? And I said, well, the doors, I'm always like really ambiguous with this. I'm like, well, doors say 8, but I don't know if that's when it starts but what I really knew is I want to get there fucking way earlier than she wants to get there. So we compromised. We roll up to this place, park in the parking lot behind the restaurant venue, and walk through the back door. So that one's way quieter. We walked through the back door into a completely empty room, empty and dark, and fairly large and empty for a restaurant. And I'm literally looking around, like I'm not sure if anyone's here. I look up and I see a couple people sitting in a booth, and I'm like, "Hey, do you guys work here?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Is the band? Is there a band playing?" And they're like, "Yeah, they're starting at 8." I'm like, oh, "Okay." I look, and it's around 7:30 at this point. And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, why am I the only one in this place? Well, we end up having a table where then this is not an exaggeration, and I'll find the pictures of this too and post them for you. Our table was directly in front of what was about probably a 10-foot stage. But when I say in front, what I mean is that my girlfriend and I were sitting at a 2-top table that was round, and me sitting back in my chair like normal, I could put my foot up on the front of the stage. So Danny's bass drum head was maybe 6 or so feet directly in front of me. So now when I have seen them play after that on the latest tour with him playing with Tool, and it's this massive, just overwhelming experience, I have that other perspective where it adds something it's a very unique experience to hear the playing on this giant grand scale, but have experienced it on the, in very close time proximity, experience the same person playing the same drum set, and in some cases very similar music, but while you're sitting and having grilled chicken and your feet are propped up on the stage. So point of all that being, I've had a handful of opportunities to talk to Danny, and what I'll say is, even though I was completely able to just have a conversation with him, weirdly enough, I made my mom go see them in Ventura like 2 weeks after the show where my feet were up on the stage, and she went super early so she could get a seat as close as possible to him. And she also, at the end of that night, I get a text from my mom, and it's her with her arm around around Danny Carey. So what I'll say is that I was fine with having the conversation with him, and it was no huge, it was like 3 minutes, but I can also own up to the fact that afterward, in both cases, I was like, oh yeah, I just feel like a fucking dipshit. So.
Oh man, and then which I have never talked to Maynard yet, but another guy I had on the podcast has trained with him multiple times. This guy's out in New York, so anytime Maynard's out there, he's the guy that works with him. And they apparently know the guy that runs the security on the tours through jiu-jitsu. I guess that guy does jiu-jitsu too. I don't know. But it's, it would be interesting to try and teach that guy an arm bar. You know what I'm saying here?
So how many levels how do the belt progressions work?
Okay, so jiu-jitsu, one thing one of my coaches says that I think is a pretty accurate statement is getting a black belt in jiu-jitsu is like, it's like the PhD of martial arts. Like I own one of the larger gyms in our state. We're the second largest on like square footage, right?
It's your gym.
Yes, and
Okay.
we just doubled in size this year. That's another thing. But it's like it took me 11 years and 4 months of doing what I'm doing and growing a very large gym and being very successful and having lots of students to even earn my black belt. Like 11 years and 4 months of doing it is a total lifestyle, right?
Right.
And I was in college for part of that, but I've been teaching martial arts since 2012. So, you know, that's you do see. That's why you see a lot of spin-off jujitsu stuff. Like I kind of podcast about everything I'm interested in, honestly.
Right.
And it's just become. I'm sure, like when what I was gonna kind of we can talk about this is. It seems like naturally, progression-wise, Tiny had experiences in your podcasting that you're doing, in your photography, or just a natural extension of yourself. Like I know that's what like my podcast it became that more and more as I was doing it, but it just became an extension of everything I was involved in and everything I was interested in. And honestly, I think balanced me out because I do like talking to people. And when I started lecturing and podcasting and all at the same time, and then I teach martial arts classes. So it really, I think, balanced me out as a person to be able to just engage like that and to engage and talk with people, instead of just like burdening my wife, Cora, who's a saint, with, all of my ideas and all of my interests, because they're numerous. I can
Right.
just make a show, just a side show, right? So I do 5 different spin-off shows on my podcast, but it's and then most of the episodes end up like this one, and we talk about all of them in one episode,
Right.
right? And all of your interests too. That's kind of the goal of like the Life Unraveled. It's like, hey, we're all experiencing this. What's your experience been like? You know? And one thing I love about get back on your content, man, is that whether it's a yoga meditation or meditations or a yoga class, I've seen you share some virtual yoga classes. We offer yoga here at our academy. But it's just like you kind of share your life. So I feel like, I get to experience life through your eyes sometimes when you're walking Steve and doing dinner in a movie, all
Right.
of these things. So it's like, that's like a podcast in and of itself in a way. Right. And it's creative that you do these things because I don't see anybody else doing them, but it's just unique. I can't say enough about it. I obviously am a fan, but one thing that I like, go
Let
ahead.
me chime in on this because and you know, I'm not going to get choked up right now, but it's like right on. It's kind of a topic that could veer into that for sure. Just my way of kind of making sure you know that this is a very significant thing that I'm going to express to you. That'd be fucking weird if I just forgot what it was right now. Like literally right now,
It's
as I'm
happened.
saying this, I just forgot what I was going to express. I'm not going to forget it. So it's amazing to me to hear what you just said. It's validation, and it's an expression of someone's appreciation. It's an expression of someone's understanding. And in fact, in this case, what I'm getting at is your interpretation, or better yet, the experience that my content elicits in your thoughts or in your mind, in your consciousness, subconscious, whatever it is, whatever that experience is, that looking at a video that I do or a live stream or reading or whatever it is, it's very validating that for all the reasons that we've talked about before, just because you hope that you can have an impact on someone. But it's it's a road that is, it's a very, it's not exactly a lonely road so much as it's a, um, it's entirely fueled by intuition and instinct and a willingness to be vulnerable to the idea that what you're doing may not make any sense to people. People could be bothered by it for some reason. They could question your motives or your intention or this or that or the other, and the list goes on and on and on. But at the end of the day, getting back to why I do it, it actually is because regardless of how much I wish that it wasn't this simple, I actually think that some of this stuff that I'm putting out there is actually worth creating an experience of that other people can enjoy. So I think that there's a value to it. I make the content, I post the picture, I write the paragraph because I believe that in that moment, I happened upon an experience that was worth fucking sharing with people. And that's at the end of the day, that's all that it is. Now, on the other side of that sort of lonely, uncharted, I'm not sure what people think or how they feel about this, is the fact that there's no rules. Like, if it's funny, and a great example of this is yesterday, 2 days on actually, what I mentioned about the thought about Tool, I think happened 2 days ago, because yesterday I was getting ready to do a live stream of Steve, and I thought to myself, just for a split second, I thought to myself, well, I can't do another live stream of Walking Steve. Like, I just did one of those yesterday. And then I thought to myself, why the fuck is that rule there? Like, there's no, that is nonsense that it is, there are no, like, I'm going to do what inspires me and what I think I should do. And again, if you don't like the content that you're seeing online, just don't keep looking at it. Like, I can tell you, the internet for me, it's an amazing place, because when I see stuff that is not going to improve my day or my thoughts in that moment, if it's not something that's educational to the degree that I need to know it and I need to absorb it in that moment, I just don't fucking look at it. No offense to you. It's just not my thing. So it's like a blessing and a curse, where when there are no rules to sort of what you're doing and how you want to, there's guidelines, I guess. There's topics that I tend to gravitate to and film and talk about, but I think at the end of the day, it's really freeing. It's a really freeing journey with no absolute destination, but with this goal at every step of the way that, like, you can sit back and say, yeah, that thing that I did today, that thing that I put out there, that picture that I took, like, I remember the picture, I know why I took it, it had a meaning, and that's special enough. So I think that the way that you described how your podcast has gone, it's like, that's exactly how it should, like, it should be a discussion about the shit that you're into, and your willingness to own those passions and to own them in a way where you're willing to talk about them and put it out there, that's something that I don't think that many people are willing to do. I think people they're there's a lot of fear around people really understanding what you're all about and knowing the truth of what makes you tick. And I just found myself, over the past few years, and especially during what we're going through now, in your outline, you mentioned that you might want to talk about LA during the
Yeah.
COVID. I'll say that right now, when, when we're all dealing with this thing that no one knows what the fuck's going on. No one knows. Everyone thinks they know this and that and the other about, do masks work? Do they not work? Why are we on lockdown again? Should we go to school? Should we not go to school? Is there a fucking conspiracy? And I could just go on with phrases for probably the next hour. We all know that is the existence that we have right now. So what the fuck better time for me to do a live stream for 2 hours of badass scenery out the window while listening to some meditation? Like, if not now, I don't know when I would ever think that it was okay to do shit like that. So that's kind of the journey that I'm on. And it holds true with podcasts. It's about 6 weeks ago. I'm not sure if you've kept up with the quarantine beer chugs shows that Art O'Leary and I have been doing, but he's a really great friend of mine, and we kind of came up with this idea to do these shows, and there were no rules to what it was going to be. That we didn't decide ahead of time, well, it has to look like this and it has to be that and this many people have to watch. And it was just, let's just do this. Let's just see what happens. And what has happened with that content is what started as a huge Facebook phenomenon of a 340,000 person beer chuggers group that's very active to this day. It was created by a dude who wanted to just drink some beer with his friends, and a week later, the group that he created had 100,000 people in it. And today, 3 months later, it has 340,000 people
Wow.
in it. So Art and I started doing a show, and the show has evolved into a phenomenon that's really very similar to what we've been talking about with what we experienced with widespread panic. And this community of people have formed. And I mean, I've made 20 close friends in the past 6 weeks just by doing a show that neither Art nor I had any idea what it was going to be. So that's what I think. I think that the creation of, I call it experiential content. I think that that's just a doorway into connecting people. And I mean, I get instant messages weekly from people that I've never met, who I've quickly become friends with. And, I can't, the hundreds, if not thousands of people that know who Steve the dog is, thanks to my dumbass videos of him. Like,
They're great, man.
So
They're great. Like, they brighten my day. Like, there's one of the first ones I watched, Steve peed on like every tree.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I was like, I have a dog.
Didn't you comment on that one?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Right. But I tell you, the first post I ever commented on of yours, I was starting to recognize you at the panic shows, and I'd friended you. And it was the first time you had popped up in my feed, I want to say. And I just commented, tiny hat.
What was the
I want to say you were like outside of a panic show. It might have been the New York run, but I could be wrong. But it was like I'd friended you around that time, and like I saw you posting, and you were at I want to almost guarantee say you were at a panic show that I wasn't at. And because I remember you posting a lot on that New York run, and like
oh yeah, I was everywhere. I mean, I have probably 50 hours of live streams from all around New York City, which, to be honest with you, and maybe somehow the right person will hear this. And if anyone is watching knows, or Brian, maybe about this, but the ability to catalog and search and retrieve in any organized fashion live streams on Facebook from your own account is piss poor. So I have a ton of the streams that I did from New York that, you know, a week after I did them, New York fucking closed. And New York probably will never be the same as it was before it closed. And so, you know, streams of just people walking around Times Square, just like me walking. I walked probably 100 miles that week. So it's been interesting for me to look back on things like that New York trip and think to myself, I wonder why I was so motivated to make live streams of just random people walking through Times Square and, you know, me walking down the street. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure, but there's content that happened to come out of that is in some respects, maybe historically significant. And it was just my intuition was like, hey, like this seems like a good thing for me to capture. And I had like, you would not believe the shit that happened to me in there. Some stuff that one stream in particular that I would love to find, where I was sitting on Broadway and was about to go into a subway station, and these randoms, three people, a guy, what turned out to be his soon-to-be wife, and their friend, like ran up to me and they were like, "What are you doing? Who are you? What's going on?" And I was like, "I'm just kicking back, live streaming." I'm like, "Who are you guys?" And they proceeded to tell me this whole story and how I can't remember if they had just got married or if they were just about to get married. And they were just as happy as could be to just be like, "Oh yeah, let's see. We just want to be in this random person's video." So it's interesting. The topic of what content is good content is one that I think about a lot, and it carries over deep into things like just podcasting in general. But who knows how many people agree with our perspective on this? I mean, I'd be interested to hear what's the feedback that you've gotten.
Well, I've talked with Cora about this several times, and it's like I get messages too, and it's happened. My podcast has gained more momentum and viewership across the board over the last since the shutdown.
Right.
And I get messages a lot and comments a lot, and it is interesting because I make these connections with people I never thought I would make connections with, right? But I also think, in a way, sociologically, that we're commentating on a new social leap forward, like what you commented on about New York, maybe that things will never be the same. I've thought a lot about that, and literally on a week's notice, I had to pivot all 5 of my college classes and just start teaching all of them online. I was teaching all 5 of them face-to-face. And that may happen again this fall. But it's like...
What were the classes, just out of curiosity?
This fall, I'm teaching Western Civilization 1, U.S. History 1, which goes to the Civil War, and Arkansas history. So I teach our state history class.
Okay.
That's what I've got this course load. I teach Western Civ 2 and U.S. History 2 as well. So we're just a community college, so I teach kind of all the gen eds. My master's thesis was topically over the history of martial arts. That's the short version. It was more intricate than that. But I think that we're going to take a lot of leaps forward. Like why I keep commenting about your stuff is because I feel like if I was around you, I would probably try and hang out with you. You know what I'm saying?
Hey man, I mean, I'm not really awesome at geography, but hop on a plane when that shit's safe and come out here to LA.
Yeah. Well, although, here's
I don't know if you like, we'll get to LA in just a minute, but I'm sure like I do hang out with plenty of people who I know just the same way, and that's that's what life is about, as far as I can tell. You know, it's like building those connections.
Well, and that this content creation we keep talking about seems to be the conduit. It's the conduit for these social experiences. Like imagine, I keep thinking about, like I mentioned, being homeschooled earlier, and like the pitfall of that experience for me is I was not around other people very much at all. Like my parents went to church, and that was my only social experience, right? Um, but that I've just been thinking about people's social interactions, and like I didn't podcast for a couple weeks after the lockdown. And when I did, if you looked back on any of my episodes, like the first 10 I did, I was like, a person. Oh, I haven't seen a person in a while. Like I just haven't left my house, and I haven't done a podcast, and I haven't been at the gym. The gym's closed. We had to close. But it's just like to see a person, I noticed like this weird change in my behavior of like, I'm sitting there waiting on you to log in, and I click approve. And then it's like,
Right.
And it's because I'd been without that interaction, and I liken back to when I was a kid. And I wonder how many, if we will be making, just because we're capable, technologically capable, if we will be making more contacts and interactions like this as a society moving forward in education, information delivery, etc. That's interesting to me.
Well,
But
I've actually done quite a number of live streams in the past year where during the course of the conversation that was going on, whatever the topic was, whether it was, something about Steve or something about a panic show or anything, about COVID, about whatever, there's a lot of places where I talk about the significance of the medium itself for connecting people. And these conversations and comments way preceded this lockdown. And they all came from me seeing how social media has evolved over the past, decade. And I think that the response that I would have to that comment that you made is that unquestionably, absolutely, positively, the way that we're using social electronic communication and connection, such as with this, is in its infancy to what it will become. And whether the way that it will evolve in terms of the effectiveness that there is to. So like if you think back, in fact, this shirt View is a company that I started about 5 years ago, and it was a dating app that was called View, and it was a short-lived endeavor, primarily because my partner and I decided to kind of part ways. But the concept of View was interactions that were very authentic and real time. There was not a profile in View. It was, everything had to be live. Now, ironically enough, this was way before I started live streaming on Facebook. But the point being that humanity has had this deep desire to be more connected. People, like what you just said, you're not the only person who's having that experience where you're going stir crazy at home, and you have this human interaction, and it's very significant to you. And right away, your whole body psychology, your whole physiology changes instantly. Well, another person could look at that and say, oh yeah, but you didn't, like, you and Mike didn't, like you didn't really get to hang out with Mike because you guys did it over the computer. Well, that's a limiting belief on on the impact that it can have. And so as far as I'm concerned, we're just now in the beginning of how these technologies are going to evolve and how they're going to be used. And there's still going to be a need and a desire and an existence of plenty of true physical contact. But there's a whole new respect and understanding that's going to develop for the impact of non-physical connection. And I think that that's something that this situation with COVID has pretty much put on turbo. And when this all ends as we see it today, it's going to, whatever the new way is, number one, it's going to evolve into that new way very gradually. And number two, as it's evolving, this shit's going to be going on the way it's already going on more and more and more and more. You know, whether it's people having Zoom calls for their work, everyone's got to work from home, whether it's people having podcasts, whether it's, you know, me talking to my new nephew or me seeing my new nephew who I've never met, but I've seen only on live streams. It's this, I've said it plenty of times before, and great time to say it again. Live streamed media and live streamed interaction is not going anywhere. It's going to just get more and more and more and more. It's going to merge with life itself. That's what I believe, and that's why the content of just random things like Steve walking around, we're going to start seeing quite a bit more of it. Whether it'll be in a month, whether it'll be in a year, I don't know. But it's those ways of connecting are on the rise, and they will hit a point soon that rises rapidly. That's my, keep this one on recording for that little statement there, just in case it's right.
We'll make it a clip.
All right.
Yeah, man. And I think, you know, big events like this pandemic seem to kind of always open the door for, like you said, it will be a gradual process, but there's always like some sort of event that kicks the snowball down the hill that becomes the avalanche when it hits the bottom. So I'm just, it's interesting because we're part of it. And it's everybody, the buzzword's unprecedented time. And yeah, on a lot of, and I've just been trying to say, yeah, but there's so many silver linings here, right? About all of the stuff that's going on, all of the innovations we're seeing society make, not necessarily in terms of responding to the virus, but working with the virus, like working alongside, you know, coexisting in this environment where we don't really know what's going on.
Right.
And well,
so what's it like in Arkansas? Like what's the vibe like? What's a day like?
We have a really conservative governor that until yesterday said that he was not going to pass a mask mandate because that it wouldn't be enforceable. And then he passed a mask mandate yesterday, which there's a lot of Arkansans talking and being very divided on this right now. But I think, I've talked to a lot of people. I've made posts trying to gauge just where everybody's at. And I have no problem with it. I own a business. I have no problem with it. It's like, oh, you're telling me that we might get back to normal a little sooner? Okay. Yeah. If you're not 6 feet apart from that person, wear a mask, please, while you're inside my business, if you're not exercising. You know, so it's going to be weird. A lot of the sheriffs and law enforcement in our communities, not just my community, we are in one of the larger towns in the state. But there sheriffs in our state have said, well, we're not going to support this. We're not going to enforce it. Like, you want us to take your mask narking phone calls and stuff. Like, there's been some weird press about it already, and just people making posts. And like, we've hit on this a few times. Like, it's the only thing that sucks about this, other than people dying of this disease, is people being on my feed that are not enriching my life through their commentary of what's going on. Right. Like, I'm scared too, man. I've had sleepless nights too. And have, you know, I heard Joe Rogan talk about this on his podcast with Bob Saget, but he gets tested like every day and he's still like, am I having a hard time breathing here? Is this it? Do I have COVID?
This is Joe Rogan.
Yeah, he said that
Really?
the Bob Saget podcast was real good. But Bob Saget is 64. Isn't that crazy? But I was like, well, yeah, you know, it has tipped everybody's anxieties and hypochondria and fear of the government. Like that, I would say that is we're a red state, you know, we're a conservative state, and it's I've seen a lot of that chatter that kind of I have conservative friends and they're still my friends. I don't care. But seeing some of you know, I'm seeing a lot of chatter from that sector. And then I'm seeing a lot of other chatter about like, put the damn mask on, you know, and I'm just kind of like, to each their own, guys. You guys are being super negative over here though. And stop mask shaming them. And
Right.
I'm just going to wear the mask just because it's altruism, man. Like it's the best thing I could do to be selfless right now, you know, of just like, well, maybe it helps me, maybe it helps Cora, maybe it helps my student, I don't know. And until we know, I'm open to trying new shit. And I've been wearing a mask anytime I go inside anywhere. I wasn't going anywhere initially, and then like I went a few places and I didn't have one on, and I got paranoid. We wore one everywhere in Florida, and like our servers were bringing us food not wearing one. I thought that was interesting. I was just like,
Right.
but it's played on anxieties in a way, and I see that in the chatter of the digital space in our state. You know, New York and Connecticut, New Jersey passed travel bans on us like 10 days ago because we've been exploding in cases, honestly, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of that. The South, stereotypically, for whatever reason, did not, I think, deal with things as well regionally as other parts of the country. I think the county by county approach has been one thing I've chimed in on that seems to be like successful for states dealing with. They take a county by county look at the cases and they tailor a plan based on what's going on in the county. So, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, here it's we just went back into. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know. This is how bizarre it is. To answer your question on your little outline, life in LA with well, actually there were two. I think one was life in LA with Steve the dog. I'll just throw on with COVID. It's so on March 13th, we started our lockdown. And on March 13th, I don't think anyone really knew what the fuck that even meant. I know I didn't know what it meant. I was like, okay, well, I guess we're going to see what happens here. And it was a Friday. But by the middle of that weekend, Sunday, I remember I went to Beverly Hills and took a bunch of pictures and also did a couple live streams down in Santa Monica on the beach. And within the span of about 3 days, the city completely ceased to have any similarities to what it was the previous week. And out here on Wilshire, where I live, where there's 8 lanes of traffic right below me, there was 0 traffic, to the point where, and I didn't do this, so someone watching is not going to have the ammunition to tell me how irresponsible I am. However, I wanted to, and in fact, I'll even go so far as to say I regret not doing this. Taking Steve out one night, or really during broad daylight on this, like a Sunday morning was when I was thinking of doing it, and having him just sit directly in the middle of the intersection on Wilshire that's right outside my door, of 8 lanes of what would be traffic, but where he's just sitting posing for a picture right in the middle, like just in the dumbest place for your dog to ever be. because there was simply no one was out. There were no cars, there was no traffic, there was no noise. It was like, it was not LA as everyone knew it. And that continued for most of the time. So I would say 3 to 4 weeks ago, probably it's 3 weeks ago maybe, we started, a gradual reopening. But of course that was reversed. I think on the 4th of July, or right after, maybe the Monday after the 4th of July, just this past Monday, I think, we apparently are back to nothing is open. And so it's been really a pretty unique, and, to use the word you used already, it's an unprecedented experience. And it's one where you mentioned you went out after having not gone anywhere for a while. You went out and went to some store or whatever, and you got paranoid is the word you used. And that's exactly, that's what it's like. You've never had an experience of walking into a fucking grocery store and feeling a feeling that is most similar to a fear or a paranoia or a discomfort at the whole environment that a week prior was a grocery store. And that's the thing that's been the most, that's been the most significant feeling that I have on a day-to-day basis. And it's even something as simple as just walking down the street. The way that you are and are not sort of supposed to interact with people based on social distancing, based on masks, based on what if a person walks up and wants to pet Steve the dog. Now do I start thinking about, well, okay, what am I getting into there? So it's a very unprecedented experience, and it's one that I think about pretty much constantly, that and Tool. but it's like I don't have any good answers.
Running to a whole Tool song is a great idea. I did it after I saw you do it, back on your health and wellness habits.
Dude, it's the best.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I actually have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, dude, I feel like I could sit here and talk with you for 2 more hours, man.
Well, we'll do another one.
Well, hopefully we can continue, because there's definitely things I would love to talk with you again in the future. So maybe we can wait a few weeks and do it again or something.
Absolutely. I'd love to, man.
Yeah. I've got another guest coming on in a few minutes. We're examining this concept of the lost cause myth, which is this idea that the South didn't fight to preserve slavery in the Civil War. It's a history that was taught in the South. They rewrote the history books after Reconstruction until 1990. Anyway, we're examining that myth as it occurs in film, right? So Gone with the Wind.
Okay.
For example, or Birth of a Nation. We did a pairing of those. This time we're doing the film Gods and Generals in Gettysburg, if you remember those two. So it's going to be interesting. So I'm gonna have to. I got an appointment with them, but man, this has been a great talk. I really appreciate you taking the time. I was looking forward to it, and I'll share it over your way when I get it edited.
Perfect, man. I appreciate it. It's been awesome, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. We can, whenever timing works, let's just do it. The formula is whatever happens.
All right, man. Sounds great.
Sweet.
Have a great evening, man. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
You too, brother.